Hello, welcome to OHT Space, where we embark on a journey to better understand the cosmos. We explore different topics related to space like dark matter, time dilation, and what space is. Today on our voyage, we'll be interacting with another explorer on a voyage to the cosmos, a female astrophysicist to be precise. As part of the role model series, we'll be learning from experiences of an astrophysicist on a voyage to space. Dr. Renée is currently an associate professor of astronomy and astrophysics at the University of Toronto. Her research revolves around understanding how the universe evolves and changes with time, what it was like in the past, and what it is made of. She's a TED Senior Fellow and heavily involved in science communication and outreach. Similar to you, I view science as a challenge. The problems in physics are a puzzle that can be solved with persistence. I would love to learn more about your mentorship efforts to improve diversity within the sciences and support women of color in STEM. First of all, what inspired you to pursue a career in astrophysics, and when did you know for sure that this is what you wanted to do for a living?
That's a really good question. I think, to be honest, I think I would be happy doing any kind of physics. I happen to love astrophysics because I love space, I love the sky, but the main driver for me is curiosity about how things work. And in my undergrad, I was exposed to a lot of different kinds of physics, and I thought all of them were very exciting. And so for me, it wasn't necessarily the day I knew it had to be astrophysics, but more that I felt when I was young, I was just really curious about how everything worked. And so that's what drove me to the physical sciences.
That's great. So, did you have female role models growing up? And if yes, then who were they and what role did they play in your decision of becoming a scientist?
So I would say, in terms of role models of women I saw doing science, I didn't really encounter any role models that weren't my school teachers until university. There wasn't like a woman scientist that I looked up to when I was a young person. But I did have really encouraging teachers, and my mom had always encouraged me to think and to read and to learn. And so, I credit her a lot with pushing me to be curious and pushing me to realize that I had a right to ask questions, that it wasn't just a certain kind of person who can ask questions. And then, when I was in high school, particularly, I had a few science teachers who supported my desire to do science and understand me. I also had some teachers that made it quite difficult and made me kind of not question if I should do science, but that didn't instill that sense of wonder. And then only when I was an undergrad did I encounter, professors who were professors who were women, and those other kinds of role models. I think maybe, when I was at university and when I was in high school, there wasn't really any internet, at least not like we have now. And I think that has changed a lot because now it's possible to have role models that are much more visible.
Yes. And when you were in high school, what were the resources you used to learn more about your interest?
I actually, there were a few series of books. There was a series of books, which I'm not sure is still in print, but it was called Look and Learn. And it had, a bunch of different books about different physical things in the world. And I remember just reading those and being really excited because it was explanations and descriptions of how the world worked. And then when I was actually in primary school, I went to a school where they tried to have an integrated learning model. So instead of just learning about everything separately, they taught us about, different things at the same, with the same kind of topics. And I found that really interesting and stimulating. And so that helped a lot.
Great. And during your undergrad, how did you choose a college to study in? Like, what was the process of choosing a college?
Yeah, that's really good. So I'm from South Africa, and so I studied in South Africa. And actually, during high school, I participated in a science enrichment program that was very forward thinking. They were designed to try and bring people into the STEM sciences that were not typically represented. So they focused on people of color, they focused on Black people in South Africa, and also women. And so I did extra science while I was in high school at the university every month. And then if I completed this course, I was able to get a scholarship to study. And that was a big thing in my life because, we didn't have that much, I would have had to take a loan. My family wasn't necessarily that well off. And so it made a big difference to my life that I could get a scholarship. So I actually studied in my hometown. And that was one of the reasons why I picked the university, because they were supporting me. They didn't offer astronomy at my undergrad university. They do now, but they didn't at the time. And so I enrolled in a distance learning institution. There's a big university in South Africa called the University of South Africa that does distance learning. And so I could, while I was doing my undergrad, I could take 1 or 2 courses in astronomy where I would complete the assignments at home and then fill them in, which was great. So I managed to get that little bit of astronomy that I wanted, as well as physics.
That's great. And you were selected for the prestigious Rhodes Scholarship and got your PhD in astrophysics from University of Oxford. So how do you think studying in a different country broadened your spectrum of thought?
Yeah, I think one thing that I really encourage people to think about themselves as global citizens, because when you go to a new place, it's very easy if you grow up in the global South to think that maybe my education is bad because of where I grew up. And I think there was a part of me that was worried that maybe I had missed some important thing that I was supposed to study, and I would only notice that I was deficient when I went to abroad. And one of the things that I was really pleased by is realizing that there's really quality education around the world. And so in a sense, it made me value my undergraduate education more when I was overseas, because I realized that it is possible for you to learn wherever you are. The other thing I think is important if you encounter people that are different from you is they just challenge the way you think about what is and isn't expected. And so I learned a lot culturally from people that were different from me. And I taught them things that were different as well. And so that really broadened my perspective. I say to my students, I have students from all over the world, and I say to them, it's really important to challenge yourself to think and not just take for granted the way things are, because that broadens your perspective and then broadens it also for science thinking.
Yes, and you founded the Hope Princeton Exchange to provide mentorship program for South African women. And how was that experience for you? And what did you learn from mentoring young women?
Yeah, one of my goals for starting the program was exactly that same feeling, right? Was that I wanted to bring South African women to come and work with me in Princeton in our summer research program, although in South Africa it's winter. But because I wanted to give South African students the opportunity to see themselves as global citizens and not, sometimes it's easy to feel like people are going to always be helping me, but I don't feel like an equal participant, particularly if you're from a country that has received aid a lot, right? Which is the case for South Africa. So a lot of the time it becomes part of your mindset that people are helping me, but they're really doing me a favor. And so I wanted to bring these students and have them do research together to help them see that they are equal participants in the science exchange, and they are worthy of that collaboration. And that was really useful. We did it for a few years while I was at Princeton, and now we have summer schools here at the University of Toronto, where we bring students from all over the world for the same reason, so that they can see themselves, learn things, but also engage with international students and Canadians.
Yes, and why did you decide to move to Canada from Princeton to the University of Toronto? And how different is your work there from your postdoctoral fellowship at Princeton?
So the way it works in academia, I didn't really appreciate this when I was in my undergrad, because it's very easy if you do your undergrad where you were born, you see the world as the same, right? Even though you're at a university, the world is the same. And then when you go away, either to a different university in your home country or a different university in the rest of the world, you suddenly see, oh, the world is very different. And so the way the jobs work in academia is at every stage, being a professor, you can imagine how many jobs there are in the world if you think of the number of universities in the world, and then imagine that typically there's a new job when someone retires. That means that there can be, a relatively small number of jobs every year. And so when you apply for those jobs around the world, you apply broadly where you think you might want to live. And so Toronto was one of the jobs I applied for. And then you go through a position, if you're selected to interview, then you go through an interview process and you talk with them. And throughout that interview process, they get to know you and you get to know them, and you start to see, is this the kind of place where I would be successful? This is the kind of place where I would be able to teach students? And so after that process, I decided that Toronto would be a good place for me to do research.
Okay, and what are the various skills that you require in a job that you didn't think you would be needing?
One of the things I think I didn't realize was valuable in my life in academia. So typically, I tell my students there are two big skills that you need to be a successful researcher, and our research is very different from just doing classes, right? Because when you do classes, the goal is that you are learning information and you're learning skills. And so you are reading things, absorbing them, practicing them, and then you can be tested. But when you do research, it's sort of taking all those skills and applying them to something where you've never seen this before. And also, maybe no one has seen this before. So it's a very different mindset. And sometimes it's very interesting when students start doing research, they think like, I know the answer and I'm hiding the answer from them. But the point is I don't know the answer. That's why it's research, right? And so one of the skills I think, two of the skills I think students need is that you want to be unafraid to try something, even before you know it's 100% correct. So you need to attempt things and have that confidence to try things. And then the other skill that you need is the skill to look at what you've done and examine it critically. So by critical here, I don't mean negative, but if I, for example, come up with a theory for how dark matter in the universe interacts with itself, I need to ask myself questions like, this idea that I've had, what does it mean for the observations that I have? Does this make sense given the data and the observations that I've already made? Can I make predictions for what I expect? How can I test if this idea makes sense or not? And this is a process you have to do all the time, not just for big ideas, but for small things. Like if you're writing a piece of computer code and you're not sure if the answer you're getting makes sense, you need to think to yourself, how will I design a test to figure that out? And so that kind of critical thinking is so important in students. And it's something I didn't necessarily expect until I started doing research, because I thought it was just learning and being smart and then working hard. But here, working hard means something specific and not just cramming all your notes. It really means taking a step back and saying, did I expect the answer of this calculation to be 5 or 500,000? And if I get an answer that's 500,000, how can I tell if it's a new physics or a mistake? And so that's basically all we have to check all the time. And that I was surprised by that when I started doing research.
This is very random, but what are your views on the way the universe will end? What do you think is the most probable scenario?
Given the data that we have right now, the universe is probably just going to get really cold. So because the expansion of the universe is dominated by dark energy, and this dark energy, which is a word we use to describe something we don't yet fully understand, this anti-gravity, but the way it appears, the more the universe expands, the more of this there'll be, which means in the far future, we'll basically run out of all the gas to make stars and we don't make new gas. and the stars will burn out, and so you'll basically be left with a universe that's quite empty and quite cold forever, which maybe is depressing, but I think is also kind of beautiful.
It's sad because if life does remain, it won't know if there's other life forms out there because it'll be so far away. There won't be any way to contact them, the other galaxies.
Yeah, I mean, in this far future, the galaxies themselves will be gone, right? So this is way far in the future.
Yeah.
Yeah. So at that stage, there wouldn't be galaxies around. Yeah.
Yes. So many students want to start doing research before they even go to college, high school students mostly. So do you have any tips for them how they can begin research?
Yeah, I think one of the things, so first of all, there's a lot of data that is publicly available. A lot of particularly in things like astronomy and cosmology, you can download data, for example, from like the Hubble website or soon the James Webb Space Telescope website. You can actually download some of the data. So a question is, there are different ways to define a research problem. The first could just be, I want to understand how something works. And so you can start to figure that out. So asking the question is the first step. What is the research question that you want to ask? And to try and be as specific as possible, because if the research question is, I want to understand how the universe ends, that can take a lot of data, a lot of analysis. Whereas if you decide to be very specific, I want to analyze the data from this telescope to see if I can measure the expansion rate of the universe, that's much more specific, and they'll help me do that. And so write down your research question, and then think about what you need. Probably the thing you'll need to do is to read up on what other people have already done in that respect. So we have a repository, which is again free for people to read, of scientific papers in a particular area. Now, those can be quite technical if you're an incoming high school student, but a lot of the time there are blogs about the kind of work. And so there are some, scientists who have regular blog posting. There's information. If you Google a particular topic you're interested in, you may find some popular science articles that help explain the background. And then you can start to think about the specific questions that you want to ask in that area.
Do you face gender bias at work? And if yes, then how do you deal with it?
Well, I think there are many ways in which the experiences of people are different in academia. In terms of an explicit gender bias at work is also hard to define, right? Because I have a department that I'm sitting in right now where I do a lot of my day-to-day research. But then I'm also part of large scientific collaborations. I'm part of national and international astronomy societies and unions. And so my work sphere is often different depending on, my work sphere is a mix of all of those spaces. I don't feel a particular daily gender bias, but I do feel that the environment of STEM is not always supportive to people who have different axes of diversity, right? There may be gender, it might be race, it might be ethnicity. And so when I say don't feel welcome, that either means people are openly hostile to them, where they say things like, you only got this job because you're a woman, or things like that. Or it can be, a lack of support or mentoring, because sometimes if you are a person of color, for example, there may not be that many people that look like you in a department. And so you may sometimes worry if, something is happening and you don't know if it's happening to everyone else, or you feel isolated. And so in those kinds of situations, it's not necessarily a bias, but it is an unwelcoming behavior that you need to do a little more work to make sure that the assumption is not normative to, say, white men, which makes up a lot of scientists.
So how important is coding in your work, and how can I start learning it early on?
That's a really good question. When I was an undergraduate, I thought the only thing I will never do is coding. I didn't like it at all. And now I would say it's 80% of what I do. I really love it. I would say that first of all, there are quite a few tutorials. So at the moment, I do a lot of coding in Python. There's also coding, if you're interested in statistics, there's coding in R. There's also other languages that are sort of springing up. And there are lots of tutorials online, like beginner Python, courses. There are like Coursera courses, and some of the Python stuff is linked to research problems too, which is quite nice. So you can think about that. And I would say coding to me is wonderful because, I like to bake and to cook, right? And what I like about coding is, imagine being able to make a perfect dish the same every time. If you have a recipe, which is really what a coding algorithm is, it allows you that reproducibility. And so if you're wanting to make something and you're wanting to make it again, you really want to be specific about all the assumptions you make, because the computer is just executing the things that you tell it. And I infuriate my students when I tell them, the computer's just doing what you tell it. So if the computer's giving you a strange result, it's because there's a disconnect between what you think you want to happen and what the computer thinks you want to happen. And so it actually really helps you learn how to communicate, I think, because you have to be very clear and very specific. You can't just say, any assumption you make that is hidden will lead to an error. So I love coding. I really recommend it to everybody. It's really, really fun to do.
I agree. And do you have any book recommendations for people who are interested in astrophysics?
Yeah, so there's a couple of books. They're some of them are older, but I really like them. One book is called The First 3 Minutes, which is all about the first 3 minutes of the universe and how we understand how elements were made and how the universe started off really hot, which I really like. That's by Weinberg. There's another book called Just 6 Numbers by Martin Rees, and that's about the 6 sort of numbers in the standard cosmological model, which I really like. My colleague, Katie Mack, wrote a book called The End of Everything, and that's about the end of the universe. And she quotes me a couple of times. She interviewed me for the book, but I really like the way she describes things. I also like, if you're interested in learning a little bit about women scientists, there's a really cool book that I liked that profiles a range of scientists. It's called the Marie Curie Complex. And basically the point of the book is to say, if we don't only focus on Marie Curie, who, fine, she was a woman and scientist, but she was a very one woman and a very specific kind of role model. And this book highlights different scientists that did lots of different things. And I really like that. So I recommend those.
Thank you so much. And finally, what do you think is the best part of being an astrophysicist?
I feel like I was given a 50,000 piece puzzle. If you like building puzzles, then you will love doing research. And what I love is that I get to sit down with all these pieces and just try and make a few more click in my mind. And, even if I understand the universe perfectly, it doesn't matter in the sense that the universe doesn't need me to understand her, but I really love that experience of just trying to unravel this big knot or to build this puzzle. It's very satisfying, and it can be quite scary because, you want to build the puzzle, you want to understand things, but there's a beauty to research and to understanding how things work that is really, really amazing and phenomenal. And it's the reason I get out of bed.
That's awesome. Thank you so much.